As we get ready for the final week of the regular season in Major League Baseball, I'll answer the simple question: will the Braves make the postseason? I'll answer several other questions on today's episode, including what to expect from Ozzie Albies in his return, and which of these replacement players could be back next year, and what role could they play? I'll answer those questions and many more on today's Mailbag episode of Locked On Braves. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, and welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. I'm your host, Jake Mastriani. You can follow me on social media at ShortstopBall. Check out the podcast there at LockedOn_Braves, where you can submit questions. Wow, we really messed that up. Where you can submit questions to today's mailbag episode or future mailbag episodes. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. If you're new, hit that thumbs up button. Make sure you leave me a comment down below. If you're listening on the audio version, leave me a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. It is a mailbag episode, the next to last one of the regular season as we get ready for the final week of MLB's regular season. A lot of questions to get to, including, will the Braves make the postseason? What do you think? What do I think? I will let you know. And what do we expect from Ozzie's return? Are we putting too much pressure on him in his return? What do you think about the Phillies' comments from spring training that are now being resurfaced once again? About Brian Snitker's comments on the postseason format? We'll answer all of those on today's episode. Now through September 22nd, so time's running out for this deal, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. As I said, got a lot of questions that I want to answer on today's episode. Thank you all, as always, for submitting those questions to LockedOn_Braves, and we will get to all of those. Got 19 of them to answer today, and the first one is a simple one. It's from Eddie Zapper. Sorry if I messed that up, Eddie, who says, we going to play some games in October or nah? You're asking me right now. I say no. And that I say that knowing that there's still very much a possibility that they can. It's not crazy to think that they can make up 2 games. As William the Worst says, that starting off the chat section for those here live, 9 games left, can definitely make up 2 games. You can do that, sure. I don't have enough confidence in this offense to get it done. And I think you've dug yourself too much of a hole to get out of it with 9 games left to make up 2 games on either the Mets or the Diamondbacks. And to Williams' question, I don't know who owns the tiebreaker over the Diamondbacks. For the Mets and Braves, it's all going to come down to that series in Atlanta next week. Whoever wins that series will own the season series, so that will decide that tiebreaker. I'm not sure between the Braves and Diamondbacks. I know the Braves split a 4-game set in Arizona, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Maybe somebody can let me know while we're recording here what happened when the Diamondbacks, they've swept them. So the Braves, the Braves own the head-to-head season series against the Diamondbacks because they swept the Diamondbacks back in the beginning of April, and the Braves were actually playing good baseball. So, yeah, it all depends on what happens in that series next week. The Braves could hold both tiebreakers if they win that series over the Mets. So maybe that gives you a little bit more of a chance. But again, for me, putting all that aside, I just don't trust this offense enough to get it done. And I think you have to go into Miami, as we talked about yesterday. You have to go in and sweep. You just have to. You really can only afford to lose 2, at most 3 games the rest of the way, which again is not impossible. Going 6-3, 7-2 down the stretch. Just what have you seen from this team since the end of April to make you believe that can happen? Again, I'm not trying to be pessimistic. In fact, I have said if the Braves get in, I think they still have a very good chance of making a deep run. But I just feel like from what I've seen for 4 months of baseball now from this team, I just can't trust them to get it done. I can't trust the offense to get it done. But you sweep this weekend, obviously those chances go way up. And then if you take care of the Mets and win that series, your chances really go up at that point. But you got to get it done on the field. And that offense has to continue what we saw in Cincinnati. And it has to do that consistently every game. Doesn't have to be 10 or 15 runs every game, but it has to consistently be 4, 5, 6 runs. And you see what this Mets offense is doing right now. It may need to be 10 or 15 runs a game. But again, just what I have seen for most of this season, if you're asking me right now, and Eddie is, I'd say no, we're not playing games in October because I just don't trust this offense to get the job done in these last 9 games. But certainly hopeful, and there's certainly an opportunity and a chance for them to do so. But that would be my answer right now. Let me know your answer. Let's all get our predictions in now. Are the Braves going to be in October, or do you think they're going to fall short? Let me know in the comment section down below. Emmanuel says, how many players can have a 30 home run, 100 RBI season and call that a bad or a down season? I'm not sure what Emmanuel's referencing here. He might be referencing Matt Olson, who's just 2 home runs and 6 RBI away from a 30 home run, 100 RBI season. And I think if Matt Olson gets there, I don't think anybody's really going to necessarily call it a down season. It's down from what he did last year, which was just an incredible, maybe a career year for Matt Olson. But certainly anytime you go 30 and 100, I think most people would categorize that as a very good season. And I talked about this yesterday. Matt Olson, outside of the month of July, he for the most part has been Matt Olson. Now, it was a slow start. I have my excuses for that with the baseballs not flying as much. But if he can get to that mark, he can get 2 more home runs, 6 more RBIs, and get to 30 and 100, certainly be a huge accomplishment because it did not look like he was going to get there, maybe not even anywhere close to there at the midpoint of the season. Emmanuel also said, do you see MH2 improving his base stealing aggressiveness in the future and taking his game to another level? After those 4 home runs in the series, in the Cincinnati series, I think that he would become a menace if he could steal more bases and keep up with that power. That's what I thought this season was going to be for Michael Harris. I thought this was going to be the season that we saw him go to another level, where we were going to see that 2020 season that he's flirted with so many times. And then he had another injury, and he was struggling even before the injuries and with the injuries. So I am a believer. As William says, sky is the limit for Money Mike. I don't know if sky is quite the limit. I don't think he has Ronald Acuna Jr. upside, but I mean, I think he is a guy, if he can put it all together, and he's still obviously very young, you could see a 30-30 season. Now, he has been bad at stealing bases, going back to the first part of Emmanuel's question. That is something he has to get better at, because that needs to be a part of his game. Certainly, if he is going to take his game to the next level, he has to get better at stealing bases, not just for him and his involvement as a player, but for the Braves in general. Again, we have seen this year the Braves' inability to score, manufacture runs without the home run ball. And a big part of that is there's just not a lot of team speed. The Braves, I think, I know they're bottom 5 in stolen bases, if not still at the bottom where last time I looked they were. There needs to be more team speed. They need to take advantage of these bigger bases and the emphasis on stealing. And Michael Harris needs to be a big part of that. So, yes, I was very high on Michael Harris coming into this season. I'm still going to be very high on him next year. The chases do need to calm down a little bit, and he needs to improve his stolen base ability. But if he can do those 2 things, then I think you're looking at a perennial all-star. Dustin Mounts, how would you set the lineup versus left-handed and right-handed pitching with Ozzie back, knowing he has been out 2 months and batting righty only? Ozzie's going to play every day, righty or lefty on the mound. The only thing I would say about how I would put the lineup, and I would always do this, when Michael Harris and Ozzie are both healthy, I would move Michael down to the 5-6 spot in the order when there's a lefty on the mound, and put Ozzie at the top, and vice versa when there's a righty on the mound. Obviously, when Acuna's back and healthy, I'm going to put him back at the top, and then I'm going to play with that 2 spot, putting either Ozzie or Michael Harris there, depending on who's pitching. But that's really the only thing I would do. For me, Ramon Laureano plays every day, no matter what. And then it obviously just depends on what you're going to do with the other infield spots, which I think is going to be Gio and Arcia on the left side. And then maybe there'll be some mixing and matching to get Whit Merrifield in there some. But that's how I would handle it. I got a lot more questions to get to on today's podcast, including the comments from the Phillies back in spring training that have now been resurfaced, taking offense to what Brian Snitker said about the postseason format. We'll discuss that here next. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Thank you for making Locked On Braves your first listen of the day. Go make your second listen to Locked On MLB podcast, where Sully is getting you ready for everything happening the final week of the regular season, getting you set for the postseason. Check that out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. Coming up next week on the podcast, we'll do a little bit of a Minors Monday recap with Gwinnett season rounding up, but we'll be focusing a lot on what happens over the weekend in Miami. Do the Braves still have a chance? And get you ready for that huge series with the Mets, where hopefully the Braves go into that series either back one game, maybe even tied with the Mets, but certainly cannot be any worse than where you are now. So we'll talk about that a lot on Monday's episode as we enter the final week of the regular season. Let's jump back into the questions here. Another one from Emmanuel. How weird has it been watching Acuna highlights in a Mets uniform? You know, there's a lot of just weird things that have happened in 2024 for the Braves. For them to get essentially eliminated if they were to, lose this series to the Mets, which I think would basically eliminate them. If they were to get eliminated by an Acuna on the Mets team, that would just be so on brand for this 2024 season if that were to happen. But, good for him. And I'm glad that, you're going to get to see a little Acuna here with big Acuna, although obviously Ronald's not playing. And that breaks my heart more than anything, especially after, we talked yesterday with Ohtani getting 50-50. I want to be happy and excited for a huge moment in baseball like that, but it does. As a Braves fan, I think you kind of do feel it bittersweet, because you wish your guy was out there approaching those historic numbers like he did a year ago. So yeah, it would be very on brand for 2024 Braves if they were to get eliminated by the Mets with an Acuna in their lineup and on their team. But Lindor might be back for that series. Matt says, I feel if we don't achieve our ultimate goal, injuries will be to blame. They will say if we were healthy, results would have been different. I feel that is an easy cop-out, but their issues are much deeper. Hitters' approach in the philosophy doesn't seem to win in the playoffs. And you're 100% right, Matt. There is a deeper issue in their offensive philosophy that is great for 162 when everybody is healthy. It's not, and at least it hasn't proven to be great in the postseason the last 2 years, although I will say in 2021, they won because they hit a lot of home runs. And, that was obviously the year before expanded postseason into this expanded postseason format. But for the last 2 seasons, you're right. That approach and that philosophy of just waiting for that big home run has not worked in the postseason. And this season, when all of your guys are injured, it has not worked either. Now, you could say if Ronald was healthy, if Riley was healthy, things would be different. And I think the Braves would be in a much better spot. I think the Braves would be at the top wild card spot. And that's just an assumption. We'll never know. But I think if you get those guys healthy, or at least not have them miss months of the season. Again, it's not just the injuries. It is the players who got injured. You're talking about Acuna, Riley. You're talking about Spencer Strider. 3 of your best players have gotten injured and been out for significant periods of time. It's not like these guys, had a little tweak and they had to go on the IL for 2 or 3 weeks. For Acuna, we're talking about missing, 4 months. For Strider, 5 months. For Riley, 2 months. Ozzie, 2 months. Michael Harris, 2 months. It's just, again, it's not just the number of injuries. It's the impactful players who got injured and the amount of time they missed. So it's going to be an excuse. And we'll talk about this a lot in the offseason, especially if the Braves don't make the postseason and don't achieve their goal. We're going to talk about it a lot, but I do think the excuse of injuries is legitimate. Because if just, honestly, even one of those guys had stayed healthy all year, I think we're in a much different spot than we are right now. Probably not still contending with the Phillies in the division, but I think you're in a much safer place getting into the postseason and in the wild card. And that kind of leads to a point too. And I don't know if this question is coming up here, but my kind of feelings on if the Braves make the postseason or not is just great if they do. If they don't, I don't know that I can definitively say that the Braves are better than any of the teams ahead of them right now. With the way the Mets are playing and the way they've been playing for several months now, I don't know that I can definitively say that the Braves are a better and more deserving team than the Mets to get into the postseason. I like the Diamondbacks. Their pitching has not been great, but you still have a Zach Gallen, Merrill Kelly, who's had a tough year, and some other guy, that Eduardo Rodriguez, who was injured, is coming back and pitched well in his last start. Jordan Montgomery has been a terrible signing, but you know what he can do when he's on. So, and that offense has been one of the best in baseball. So I really like the Diamondbacks. I don't know that I can say that the Braves are that much better than them. And the Padres, when they're on, I say this all the time, when the Padres are on and they're playing like their talent indicates, I think they're one of the better teams in baseball. So again, if the Braves make the postseason, great. I'll be ecstatic because I want to see this pitching staff get into the postseason and have a chance. If they don't make it, I'm okay with that too, just because of the injuries, because of the way the season has played out, and because I just don't know, even as I take off my biased fandom here, I don't know that I can definitively say the Braves are better and more deserving than those teams ahead of them. But certainly I want them to get there and would love for them to at least get a shot, but we'll see if it happens. But let me know your thoughts on this. Are you feeling that if they don't get in, it's just a complete failure for the team, despite everything that's happened? Or are you kind of like me, where if they get in, it's great. If not, you've had to try to overcome a lot this year, and you're probably going to have to win 89 or 90 games to get in. Dustin Mounts. All right, we're getting into the Phillies rival situation, whatever you want to call it. Dustin Mount says, Ken Rosenthal brought up during the telecast of the Phillies game against the Brewers how mad they were in spring training about Snitker saying it's hard to hit velocity after a few days not seeing it. How much would you like to see them be flat after the bye and days off this year? So to answer the question, I mean, as a Braves fan, I would just love to see the Phillies come out flat and lose anyway, because that's just part of the rivalry. But it would be somewhat justification, although I don't know that I necessarily need that for justification. If it were only the Braves offense that struggled as a top seed the last 2 years, then yeah, you could say this is just a complete excuse from the Braves. But when the Dodgers, who had Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts, the second best offense in baseball last year, to the Braves, and they also fall flat 2 years in a row in this postseason format as a team with a bye, and you've had some AL teams not named the Astros struggle with it too, that to me right there is already justification that 5-day layoff is just not great for offenses. So you can debate that all you want. I think it obviously, and I'm not a manager, I'm not a player, so only they can tell you, and a manager is telling me that, and the players have said it's not ideal to take off that long from high intensity games. And it's not just that. And this is what I've said about this all along. It's not just a 5-day layoff. It's the fact that you have a team coming in who's already into that postseason form, who is already hot, already won a series, and the Phillies are a really good team. It's not like the Braves matched up with a team that you could just say they were head and shoulders better than. For 2 years in a row, the Braves have sat idly while the Phillies got hot, winning a wild card series, came in with a lot of momentum, and they are the worst matchup for the Braves. They match up with the Braves as well as anyone the last 2 years. So again, a lot of credit to the Phillies because they're a really good team. It's a scary matchup for the Braves, and you have that layoff, which I think does impact it. So the Phillies were offended because they felt like it was taking away from what they did. And if you want to take it that way, and the Phillies are a team that they take any little thing that they can to get an edge. Look at last postseason with what Arcia said that should have been nothing, and they use it as bulletin board material. They will take anything and use it to try to get an edge on you, whether it's legitimate or not. This is one of those things. I don't think it's legitimate. Brian Snitker's not taking anything away from the Phillies. They are a great team. It's a nightmare matchup for the Braves, who have been off for 5 days, to then have to face the team that matches up with them better than anyone And so I think there is legitimacy to what Brian Snitker and some of the Braves players have said, and what we've all said, and what we have seen over the last 2 years in this postseason format is that layoff, it's just not easy to get back into, that form and that intensity of that level, facing high velocity pitching every single night. You're facing best pitchers. You just can't replicate that over 5 days. And baseball is meant to be played every day. So again, I agree with Snitker. I think the Phillies are just that team, and that group, they're looking to gain any kind of edge that they can, that somebody might have slighted them in the smallest way. They're going to use it to their advantage, and good for them. They play off that and they feed off that, and you can tell. And they're probably going to come into this NLDS round and they are going to go off. Their bats are going to be absolutely on fire, and they're going to say, see, I told you, the layoff does nothing. That's what's going to happen. But regardless of that, I still think there is legitimacy to the fact that a 5-day layoff is not good for an offense. So we'll see what happens. But yes, I will certainly, just as a Braves fan, be rooting that they fall flat in the NLDS. All right, we got several more questions to get to on today's episode. I'm looking forward to answering a lot of these questions here next. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, which is coming up this weekend, so time is running out, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. So if you're looking forward to turning off this MLB season that's been such a frustrating one for Braves fans, get in on some Falcons action, you can use this deal from FanDuel. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to download America's #1 sportsbook. Also, make sure you visit FanDuel.com/PlaySafe for tools and resources to help you stay in control of the way you play. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Let's jump back into the questions here because I still got several more to get to. Goldie says, can you give your honest thoughts about Snit and if you believe he is the best manager to lead a team with World Series or bust aspirations? It sure seems this team has a casual acceptance of playing down to their competition, and that laid-back attitude reflects their manager. All right, this is a tough one to answer here because I love Brian Snitker, and I think he is a great manager for what this Braves team usually needs. And that is a calm, even kill approach. Don't get too high. Don't get too low. I think what this season has shown, and maybe what a lot of Braves fans have already kind of known, is that when it comes down to X's and O's, and when you are put into a spot where you have to, I don't want to say this, come off the wrong way, where you have to manage. Last year was easy. You didn't have to worry about it. All your position players were healthy. You put out the same lineup every single day. You didn't have to really manage too much. But in this year, with all the injuries and the fact you've had to mix up your lineup a lot, you've had to try to play the hot hand here or there, I think it has shown some deficiencies in his ability to manage in that regard. Can Brian Snitker lead this team to World Series? Yeah, he's already done it. And I think he was a big part of that World Series with the way that he managed the bullpen. I really, really do. But I think there have been some flaws in his managerial philosophy this year with the way that he's, when all these injuries were happening, the way that he just will not change a lot of times in the lineup, and how he is slow to respond to a guy who is hitting well or a guy who's not hitting well, and moving them around and putting the players in the best spots that they can. Look, it's a tough hand for Brian Snitker to handle this year. Do I think he's the best? I guess to simply answer this, do I think he can lead the Braves to another World Series? Yes, absolutely do. Do I think he is the best strategic manager out there? No, I do not. I do have some issues with some of the decisions that he makes, both with the lineup, in-game decisions, all that. And some of that's part of being a fan as well, that you are going to overanalyze some of those. I try to also call out when I think he makes good decisions, but for the most part, as fans, we're only going to remember those bad ones. So again, I may be kind of playing the fence a little bit because, again, I'm saying I do think he can lead the Braves to another World Series because he's already done it once. But do I think he is the best X's and O's type of manager? No, I don't. I think there are several flaws in his ability to manage a game. So again, I don't want to take too much heat for that. Maybe I won't. Maybe you agree. I don't know. I kind of, again, set on the fence in the way that I answered it. And look, the biggest thing for a manager is, do the players like playing for him? And everything you hear from the players is that they love playing for him. This has been a trying season. And look, he looks tired. I've said it. I've said it numerous times this year. He looks tired. You have not seen a lot of fire from Brian Snitker over there. Not that I necessarily think that leads to much of anything, but it's a guy who's, probably getting towards the end of his career. And I've maintained this all along, that I think he walks away after 2025. He'll turn 70. It's the end of his contract. So I think you're going to get one more year of Brian Snitker. Don't think the Braves are going to let him go, even though I know some fans want that. But I do think that he will walk away after next season, and the Braves will be looking for a new manager. But we'll see what happens with that. If he doesn't get an extension this offseason, then I certainly believe that's going to happen. Chuck McMillan, if we win out, we are World Series champions. Yeah, that's how it works. How many wins gets a wild card spot? I believe the number is 90. Talked about this a little bit yesterday too. I think 88 is the lowest total. The Mets and Diamondbacks are already at 84 with 9 games left to go. So I think 88 would be the absolute lowest. I think 90 would probably be the highest. And the Braves would have to go 8-1, I think, if my math is correct, to get to 90 wins. So that would be a stretch. So hopefully it's 89, because I think the Braves can go 7-2. I think that is more doable, even though that would be a pretty tall task as well. But I'd say 88, 89, 90, I think is probably gets it done. 88 on the low end, 90 definitely gets you in there. Leland says, hey, Jay, a couple of questions. Do you think we are touting the return of Albies to the lineup too heavily? He hasn't played in 2 months. And what do we do with Witt and Gio? How about playing Witt at third, Ozzie at second, and sit Arcia and play Gio at shortstop? I know a lot of fans are wanting that. I don't think it's going to happen. And look, I would not do it. And this is me. I'm not a manager. Brian Snitker is. We'll see what he does. And you probably disagree with me. I stick with Arcia at shortstop. And there's another question on that, so I'll save it for that. But going back, I did want to touch on this part about Ozzie Albies returning. I'm glad he's back, and I hope he comes back and gives a spark to this team. I would not be putting a lot of trust in a guy who's been out for 2 months, who has been a switch hitter for all of his career, and is now all of a sudden having to hit from one side, and is going to have a lot of righty-righty matchups, which I think he's had 15 of those in his career, and the majority of those have come against position player pitches. So I'm happy Ozzie's coming. Certainly, I think he can do better than a lot of the other replacement players offensively, but I would not be putting too much faith in that Ozzie Albies is going to suddenly turn this offense around with 1 week to go after missing 2 months and hitting from one side of the plate after he's been a switch hitter his whole career. Tyra says, do you think the Braves will bring back Laureano? He is under arbitration control for next year, so I think they certainly will. Now, it's probably going to be $6 or $7 million next year, so that's not necessarily cheap for a guy who I think is going to be a 4th or 5th outfielder next season. But I think they would like to bring him back, certainly, and they have the opportunity to do that through arbitration. Jordan Watley, who's playing third when Ozzie comes back? I think Gio is. I think you go with the defense on the left side. You let Gio and Arcia hit 8th and 9th in the order, and that's how I play it. But I'm also a defensive first guy. Matt says, I know you said you want Arcia in there for his D. For as atrocious as his offense is, he needs to be a unanimous Gold Glove winner to make up for it, and he is definitely not that. He has no approach at the plate and crumbles in the biggest of moments. I don't disagree with you. I don't. But is the drop-off from Arcia to Urshela as big as the gap between those two guys offensively? And maybe you don't think it is. Maybe you think that what you get from Gio offensively is far greater than Arcia, and is far greater than the level you see between Arcia and Urshela defensively. I don't agree with that. And again, I haven't seen Urshela play a lot of shortstop. He hasn't played a lot of shortstop at the big league level, but I still believe that the gap between those two defensively is still bigger than the gap between them offensively. Let's not try to sit here and act like Gio Urshela, I know he's had a couple of good games, is all of a sudden this offensive dynamo. That's not been the case. And I know Arcia is having a very difficult time right now and a difficult season, but just for me, and again, this is a guy who very much loves defense first, especially when you're talking about your ninth guy hitting in the order. For me, the gap between those two defensively is bigger than the gap between them offensively. And so that's why I would still go with RC at shortstop. Ted says, Laureano, Merrifield, or Urshela, are any of these back next year? If so, are they replacing someone? Laureano, again, he's under arbitration, so the Braves could bring him back for probably $6 or $7 million. It'd be his last year of arbitration. Whit Merrifield has an $8 million team option, so the Braves have the option to bring him back or not. That's pretty expensive for a guy that's going to be a bench utility player. And Urshela will be a free agent. So they have the ability to bring Laureano and Merrifield back. I would love to do that. Again, be pretty expensive, paying $6-7 million for Laureano, $8 million for Merrifield, guys that are going to be bench players and should be bench players. But when you have a year like this, when you had all these injuries, to have veterans like that are capable of stepping in when needed as obviously invaluable. So I think they'll very much consider bringing both of them back. Leland says, in games that are considered lost by one team, instead of pitching a position player, why not let the coach go to the umpire and concede game and end it, provided it is in the 7th inning or later? Could speed up the game and lessen the possibility of injuries to players. It's not going to happen, but I hate the position player pitching. I know a lot of people think it's fun and it's cute. I think it's a disgrace. So I'm all for looking for ideas to get rid of that, but shortening the game is, in my mind, not the right one. Caden Hurd, would you rather trade for a new shortstop or try to get to sign a Jack Flaherty type or a higher contract? If the Braves look to get better at any position this offseason via the trade, who would you hope we get in what position? So I haven't looked yet at who's going to be available. I know Bo Bichette's going to be a name that a lot of people are still pointing to. If the Braves are going to make an upgrade this offseason, I do think it needs to be at shortstop. Whether or not that's going to happen, I don't know, obviously, and I haven't looked ahead to see who all that would be. Willie Adames is going to be the top free agent. I don't think the Braves are going to pay that price. But if there is anywhere offensively that I think the Braves should focus on upgrading, and I just talked about the fact that I think RC needs to stick at shortstop right now, but that to me is the one area where I think you could look to upgrade and should look to upgrade this offseason to get – not just to get somebody who is better than Orlando Arcia, but somebody who does things differently than Orlando Arcia, who has become a guy that is bought into the slug first approach that the Braves are obviously pushing. And this kind of leads to a bigger conversation that we're going to have a lot of in the offseason. Does the Braves offensive philosophy needs to change? But I would love to see them go after a shortstop who can do a little bit more, who is more contact oriented, who's going to put the ball in play. And obviously somebody that plays a great shortstop defensively. That's always number one for me at that position. Last question here. This one's from Nancy. Says, disappointed that Anderson was not called up for Tuesday's game and heard Holmes is scheduled for Sunday as well. Why are they not giving Ian a chance this year? He's stretched out enough. The thought of Holmes might start a must-win game against Kansas City is scary. I do not disagree with you. I thought it was going to be Ian Anderson all along. I don't know if this is true, and maybe somebody can confirm this in the comment section for us down below. Ian Anderson has one minor league option left. If you call him up, do you lose that minor league option for next season? This is the part I don't know. Obviously, when you option somebody down, then you're using one of their options. But if you call them up and don't send them back down, do you still use that option for the year? That's what I don't know. So if somebody can answer that. But I feel like I have heard that for one of the reasons why the Braves aren't calling Ian Anderson up now, so that they can maintain that option for him next year, because they obviously haven't optioned him up. I don't think they've optioned him this year. I could be wrong about that. But that could be one reason why they haven't used him yet. But as I have said numerous times now, you are fighting for your postseason lives. Put the best players on the roster. And again, maybe they think Grant Holmes is that guy, and he was not bad in his start in Cincinnati. If he can give me 4-5 innings of 2 earned or less, even 3 earned or less, I think that you can take that from your fifth starter. But I do think Ian Anderson, even an AJ Smith-Shawver, gives you more upside in reaching that. But yeah, that one's a bit questionable for me. All right, thank you all for joining me here today. I see Soul Still Burns. Haven't seen you in here. Nathaniel Brooks, Tyrus, love above all. He says, why are we so bad at base stealing and defending against it? That is a good question, and something else that needs to be looked at in the offseason, because we are horrible. Pitchers are terrible at holding runners on, and we are terrible at stealing bases outside of Acuna. But thank you all for joining. See Cherith in here as well. Glenn, Ryan in here, Nathan Cates. Thank you all for joining. Hope you all have a great weekend. Thank you for making Locked On Braves your first listen of the day. Go make your second listen to Locked On MLB podcast. Make sure that you listen to the Braves and Marlins all weekend on Sirius XM using the SXM app. Just search Braves on there. We're running out of voice at the end. We've gone over. I'm sorry to my overlords who will not be too happy about that. But I do thank you all for this great podcast, this mailbag episode. Thank you for submitting all your questions. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube if you're new. Hit that thumbs up button. Make sure that you rate, review, and subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you get your podcast. We will talk to you next time.